All right, we're back. So as discussed, Charlie, there's a lot more stories I think we can talk about and should talk about at another time about your racing career, because I think there's a lot more to be said there still, and there's a lot more details. But we've already naturally transitioned a little bit to the politics, the logistics of promoting of events, and you, I think in the early 2000s at some point, certainly way before my time here, I've only been here for 4 years, you got into race promoting. And I remember showing up to some of your races early on, and I know, this guy knows what he's doing. He has the perspective of a racer, which I think helps a lot when you're a promoter. He thinks like the racers think. I think one example of that is always, you haven't been at a race at Prospect Park, about 10 minutes before the actual start time, maybe 5 minutes, you will hear Charlie announce last call, like to the line, and you know that it will take the racers 5 to 10 minutes to actually show up to the line. So I was like, you know what you're doing. And sure enough, there's somebody who still misses the race. But so this is one of those examples. But how did you get then into race promoting, and maybe talk a little bit about the change that you've seen also over time with regards to race promoting and just the races that we've already talked about, the disappearance of races. I think it's natural that there's kind of a coming and going, like with racers, it's also coming and going with races, and a few like summer will have stayed the whole time. But yeah, tell us more about that.
Sure. So it was 2005. I don't think I was racing then. Mm-hmm. If I was just doing some local races, right? Okay. And it was 2005 when the Kissena Cycling Club, who even though I had stopped racing I think I'm a lifetime member. Okay. I think they just kind of grandfathered me.
Did you start racing for them as a junior then, or was that the connection, or when did you get connected with them?
So I started racing.
Back to that.
My first team was my dad's team, which was been around since the 1950s, which I don't believe exists any longer, called the German Bicycle Sports Club. And there were a lot of ethnic clubs following World War II. A lot of displaced Europeans came to America. Europe was in shambles. They came to America in the late 1940s, 1950s, and they took their cycling routes with them. Mm-hmm. So back then there was a French club. There was an Italian club, which still exists today, USI, Union Sportiva Italia, and German Bicycle Sports Club. So a lot of these clubs had very ethnic roots. And it wasn't, I would say, nationalist. It was just, a lot of these people didn't speak English. They felt at home.
It's an easy way to connect. I think I don't know enough about it, but what I've read about the way soccer is structured in the city is very similar. That you have these, the Italian club, and you have the Albanian club, and you have the whatnot club. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway. Yeah.
So being of German ancestry, and the area where my dad grew up was very German, Glendale, Ridgewood area. That's the club he joined, right? And that club was a very, very strong club. And so when I started, I naturally joined that club. And I rode with that club, I think, for like the first 3 or 4 years. The reason I switched to the Kissena Cycling Club is because there weren't a lot of juniors in the German club. Right. There were more juniors in the Kissena Club. Rich Hincapie and I became super good friends. He raced for Kissena, so I joined the Kissena Club, I think probably in 82 or 83. Okay. Yeah. And that's been my club ever since, right? So I've always been in the Kissena Club. And getting back to how I got into race promoting, the former race director of the Kissena Cycling Club called me up in 2005 and said, "Hey, would you be interested in taking over?" I think he was moving, actually. I think he was moving to another state. And my first question was, "Did you ask anybody else?" And he's like, "I asked everybody. They all said no."
Response. Yeah.
And the reason I asked that is that, having grown up in cycling my whole life and seeing what race directors and race promoters go through, it's a cruel and mean job. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And, I was like, wow, I don't want to do this. Right? I just knew the people that I grew up with. I knew the race directors, and seeing that they're the first person there and the last person to leave, and the stress on their faces. Right? And I said, all right, I'll do it for a year. I'll do it for 1 year, and then please try to see if you can find somebody else. And that was over 15 years ago. And it was difficult, right? Like, I met with the guy, and having raced in Prospect Park for years and years, probably 20 years before I even started race promoting, maybe even longer. You think you know a lot, right? You're like, oh yeah, this should be no problem. I get it. There's different fields. Once you get into the weeds and start to figure out, and he's explaining to me, this is how the marshals work, and this is how the pacers work, and these are the officials you need. And I was like, whoa. And he handed me a couple of cones, a couple of signs. I mean, let's put it this way, I had a Honda Civic, a little hatchback, and all the race equipment fit into the back of my Honda Civic. So I think I had like 10 cones and a couple of signs, a couple of caution bike race signs, and for lack of a better expression, I was off to the races. Right? So
can I stop real quick? So this is like, you sat down with him, or he sat down with you, he told you everything, you took notes, there was no nothing?
He had a binder.
Oh, he had a binder. It was like an old kind of,
so he kind of flipped through the binder, and he's like, okay, this is the cone placement.
Yeah,
and he's
maybe
ready
with
to
some
put the cones.
context of the city, or
he told me. Well, I was fortunate that I was taking over mid-season, so he had already applied for the permits and everything.
So that was all in place.
Yeah, so luckily I had to figure, that's a whole nother story, but I had to figure that out the following year. So, that transition was a little easier because I already had the permits. I go to my first Prospect Park race.
I was going to say, so you had taken over the Prospect Park races at this point?
Only the Prospect Park
And this was Kissena always been running them?
Yep.
Okay. Good.
So, Kissena Cycling Club had been running races in Prospect Park since probably the late 70s or 80s, because the founder of the Kissena Cycling Club, Al Tofield, was a sergeant in the police department, in the New York City Police Department, and they had actually asked him, the police department said, listen, Prospect Park is a rough place. It was really rough in the late 70s and 80s. It's not the Prospect Park. I hear the stories,
and I don't think anybody who hasn't grown up in that, can imagine that these days.
It was a rough place, and if you can imagine, the New York City Police Department asked Al Tofield to run races.
To run the race.
Said, would you mind, we know you're into cycling, we know you put on bike races, would you mind putting races on there? Because I think if we saw that there was life in the park other than, gangs and drug dealings, perhaps it would energize the park.
Yeah, you want to bring people to the park for other reasons.
So that's how bike racing in Prospect Park started. I just took over the Prospect Park races.
And I would imagine that the Honda Civic's not going to cut it anymore today. Even though I think we're lucky to not have to go completely crazy with, like, when you look at the setups for some criteriums and all that, I think that's still another step for various reasons, obvious reasons, I think. But things have changed. Yeah. And you're still there.
I'm still there, but the Honda Civic is not.
Yeah.
I've graduated to a minivan. My first race, I think there was a total of 28 people there.
Was that standard?
It was. The thing is that, in the mid-2000s, for some reason, the Prospect Park racing had really died off. I don't know why, right? I had not been following racing very closely. I was racing a little bit, but not even doing like Prospect Park. I think I was doing criteriums or something like that. Or maybe I just taken a year off. I don't even remember. But I was surprised at the lack of attendance. It was raining. I had only gotten, I don't know what I was thinking. I only got there like an hour before the race started. I was like, it should be enough time, right? And, I'm scrambling like a maniac. I was like, wow, I really didn't budget this well. Got everybody on the line. One of the race marshals, I believe, said, did you see the corner? The downhill corner, the little chute? And I said, I saw it a while ago. He's like, it's totally flooded. So I told everybody, I said, hold on. I borrowed somebody's bike. I said, can I borrow your bike? I rode down there myself in the rain, saw that like in the hour that I had been there, it had completely flooded, and I canceled the race. So I canceled my very first race I ever organized. And I was like, wow.
This corner, is difficult. If at the very bottom of the hill and you kind of make a turn going, I guess, east or something like that at the bottom, southeast corner. still an issue these days.
Yeah. So it was. I canceled the first race. And I believe it was August where traditionally there's almost a Prospect Park race every weekend. For some reason we get these like grandfather dates every year that we don't have a lot to choose from. So the following weekend there was another race, right? And I didn't cancel that race, but immediately, being on the other side of the registration table as an organizer, I saw things that didn't make a lot of sense, right? And when I took over the races, I did exactly what I was told, right?
Yeah.
These are the way the races are run, right?
Of course.
And these are the races I had participated in, right? And I saw that there were things that didn't make sense in terms of the distances, in terms of the way the categories were organized. Just the fact that they had 4 fields. Right
Just
now,
Cat 4.
no, 4 different fields.
4 different fields. Okay. Yeah.
So the reason I saw that was a problem was that the fields were constantly catching each other, right?
Yeah.
And we wound up neutralizing people.
I mean, Prospect Park is only 3.3 miles or something like that. So when you have 4 fields, I mean, you're pretty much blocking the whole park at that point.
And we were constantly neutralizing a group, and this group was repassing this group. So, I mean, you race a lot of Prospect Park races. There's not a lot of them, right?
It's happened once, and everybody was up in arms about it because it's such a rare occurrence, and it is a hassle for everybody involved, right? You want to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah.
Right? And you did change something, I remember, I think, after that, about the start times a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a guessing game, right?
Of course.
It
changes over time.
Educated guesses, right? You assume that this field should, in theory, race faster than this field, but if one field decides that they need to warm up an extra 2 laps and get going, then the field behind might catch, right? So it's a bit of a guessing game, but it was little things like that I recognized right away that what, I can make these races better.
Yeah.
Right? I think with some key changes, I can really make these races better, and I think it showed. I mean, the attendance grew every year. The races got bigger and better, and I just tried to think, like you said earlier, like as a racer, what would I have liked to have seen?
Yeah.
Prospect Park is traditionally before I started racing was in like the Cat 1, 2, 3 race was 12 laps in a field sprint.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
Every race it was the same, right? Yeah. And if you weren't a field sprinter, well, you got a good workout, you stayed in, or that was it. Maybe once in a while there was a break, but I was like, suppose, having been fortunate to race in these stage races, I said, suppose we did a KOM competition. Right? This would be fun, right? Like this would give something other people who maybe either are not a good field sprint or don't want to risk life and limb in a field sprint, this would give another goal, right? Yeah. So we introduced the KOM competition, right? And I went out and got a sponsor for that, right? So and even that was unheard of, right? Trying to not just have the competition, but I was like, if you're going to do it, you have to do it right? You have to get a polka dot jersey. You have to have a leader kit, right? You have to give somebody a reason to go for this, right? You could get a sponsor for that competition. Yeah. So we did a KOM competition, and then
which real quick, the twice every race. I think it's usually on the same laps, but I always forget, and I should really know. But I still am at the race. Is this the KOM lap? Are they going to go fast up the hill this time? And so up the one major hill, really the only hill on Prospect Park, there's a sprint to the top, and then you get points, I think 3 deep, and then it's accumulated over the season, and whoever has the most points at the given time gets a jersey, and you have the same thing for the sprints, and I assume that came a little bit after.
Yeah. So, after the KOM competition, I was like, I could do, a sprint competition, and make it like the Tour de France, and have like a green jersey, which is the traditional color of the sprint or the points competition, right? And all of a sudden I started hearing the chatter from the teams, because I'm part of their Facebook groups or whatever, and they were like, what's the plan for Saturday, and teams started getting into this, right? They're like, we're going for the green jersey, so we're going to lead this person out. All of a sudden there was different strategy, and teams had another goal, and it made the races more exciting, right?
It makes them harder too, right? Because you might have to go with, even if you think they're sprinting for the hill, if you're not sure and there's going to be a breakaway forming from that sprint, then you want to be there, right? Even if you don't really want to sprint for the hill, you still have to think about it. And I think that acceleration wouldn't always happen on that lap. So again, it makes the race overall a little bit harder at least, right? And a little bit more exciting.
Yeah, because there's counterattacks after the climb or after a sprint competition. It's, I mean, at the end of the day, racing in Prospect Park is not long enough. It's not hard enough.
Right.
And the competition, for the most part, is not good enough.
Right.
So that's why it was always 12 laps on the field sprint.
Right, which is 36-ish miles, an hour and a half. Again, while there is one major hill, but if you're at the 1 to 3 level, that is not an obstacle. That is,
it's a big ring hill, right?
It's a big ring hill if you're in good shape, right? And or if you want to, and you can make it a little ring if you really need to. But you don't leave those races and say, "Oh my God, that was the hardest race ever," right?
Most people train after that race.
Some people ride another 40, 50 miles, and it depends on what shape you're in. But at the 4 or 5 level, the distances are short again, and then of course you're a beginner, and maybe it is actually harder, right? But I think at the 1 to 3 level, the question is more like, can we make it hard enough if you're not a sprinter, kind of like you said, that we're going to be in the competition, right, and try to break away. But even that, it's really hard to stay away, even if you have a good group of riders, because if the field's going 26, 27 plus average, it's hard to stay away with a small group.
Yeah.
And anyway, so as a detour, you made it a little bit harder. I think you moved the finish at some point too. And
and that wasn't always by design. Sometimes the park had restrictions on us. I mean, originally when it was by Lincoln Road, we were having a lot of
so that's
crashes.
On the east side of the park?
Yeah, on the east side.
Kind of after that little S kind of.
Yeah.
Up starting.
Exactly. And that S wasn't even there before, right?
Okay.
That was fairly recent in the last couple of years that they had made that. And
they purposely slowed down there, then you think, or why do you?
Well,
so it was straight.
It was straight. It was straight.
That makes so much sense. Because I was wondering, like, that seemed. When I first heard about this, the finishes used to be there. I was like, that seems like the stupidest idea ever to put it right by that S.
And again,
which is already still today a bit of the only tricky spot in the course, really.
And I inherited it, right? Meaning that I was told this is the start finish, and I had raced there, and like I said, even when I raced in the 80s, it had moved around a couple of times, right? But we were having a lot of crashes, more than usual, and the reason was because on the last lap of a Prospect Park race, right, there are a lot of people who get over the climb, right, out of breath, tired, and say to themselves, I'm not sprinting, right? I can't. And then, you get on the downhill and you're starting to feel a little better, and all the people that didn't want to sprint are like, oh, well, I'm feeling good again, right? Well,
and
of course
it's nice
you felt
and
good.
wide down in the southern part of the park. It's flat, and you come 35 miles an hour more, 40 down the hill.
And you're coasting down the hill.
Exactly.
You're coasting, you've recovered.
You got a 30-second minute rest built in.
So,
maybe not that long, but
what was happening was that a lot of riders who normally don't sprint were trying to sprint, and that's when it gets crazy. And that's when it gets curb-to-curb field sprints, and we were having a lot of crashes. So the first move I made was to move it just a little bit down the road, right? So even that little bump over Lincoln Road still was enough to tire people out. Still was enough to have gaps, I've always thought it was an ideal place to attack even in the park, because aside from the major hill, that little bump and then followed by the hill is actually a good place to attack, right? It slows down a little bit.
Launching pad,
exactly. But even that little bump was enough to convince people not to sprint. They got over that little bump, like, I'm exhausted, I can't go anymore. And so they would ease up in the final 200 meters.
So you would do it just before the hill to finish, though?
Correct. So really before that turn that goes into the zoo, because there's a big really grassy area.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of
setup there.
You need a setup.
Because after that, it's actually woods on both sides. It's kind of harder.
We used that for years, and it worked out well. It definitely helped with the crashes. And then Prospect Park was doing some construction in that area where you mentioned, where the S's are now. That didn't exist. That used to be straight. They were doing construction there, and it was reduced to like one lane. So imagine and it was reduced to one lane till about like 500 meters before our finish. Now imagine trying to have everybody, trying to reduce in like one lane. So they had like a little bit of a jogging area, but then you had like one lane. So I told the Prospect Park officials, I was like, this is, you have to be delicate when you say things with Prospect Park officials. I said, I think I could find a safer area for our finish. And they're like, well, what are you thinking? And I said, well, on the other side of the park. Now, we had never had a start finish on the west side of the park. It had always been the east side of the park. I scouted out. I went to the park on my bike. You have to have a feel as a racer, right? Like how things look, even turns, and you just have to have a sense of where a good finish would be. And I found the area that we currently use, and I was like, well, I said, this is ideal, right? Short of finishing on the hill, which would probably be awesome, right, for a lot of reasons. Safety, first of all, in terms of not having these large groups. The reason we can is that there's no setup area there, right? There wouldn't be, I need a place to have the camera and the officials, and it doesn't exist, right? I decided to have it, I guess it's about maybe, you can chime in here, 700 meters past, 600 meters past Grand Army Plaza, right? You pass Grand Army Plaza, you go down a little bit.
I think less than that.
Maybe even less than that.
It might be a quarter mile or something like that.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, 400 meters or something. Yeah.
It made sense, and immediately the riders were like, Charlie, this is really cool, right? Like, it's a lot safer right now. If in the scenario that I gave before, where the people that get over the climb and say I can't sprint, now they don't sprint, right? They're just like, that's it. Right? Also, as you know, as a racer, a lot of tactics on that final lap up that sprint, right? And it's usually like a free for all. Good lead out teams are already setting a really high pace, right? So. I've seen field sprints that almost look like a group split. Right? There's maybe 20 or 30 guys, and then there's gaps. Things we never had before in Prospect Park. So it made the racing. I feel a lot safer, and I think it made it more interesting, right? It's if you watch pro races and you see the pro teams setting up before the climb, right? Like dragging their leaders because they know at the base of the climb they have to be there. Well, while we certainly don't have mountains, the Prospect Park Hill is a tactical area where you have to be at the front.
It's enough to beat it out. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where we landed on. That was the finish, and just making changes all the time, constantly thinking about ways to make it better.
If I can just jump real quick, I think it's the best finish that we have in the city. I think it gives the most diverse group of riders a chance. It's not an uphill sprint, it's not a pure sprint like you said. I think a sprinter can, if they're in good shape, stay in that group in a position where they can still sprint. And again, like you said, depending on how fast is the lead out, who's attacking, who's not attacking, is it slow or is it fast? But you never know what's going to happen. You know that it's going to probably be some sort of sprint, but if you can make it hard enough, a sprinter, you can probably be up there. And the hill weeds it out just enough, and it gets a little tight. And like you said,
it's kind of downhill too. It picks up a lot of speed.
So if you're not in front there, it's probably too late at that point. And then yes, it kicks up a little bit to the line, which I always hate a little bit, but that always costs me. But if you come with speed, I think it is fun. With some of the other race finishes, Floyd is so flat. It's a different. What are you going to do? And in the park, in Central Park, we have a couple of more real uphill sprints and there's some fun finishes too there, actually, thinking about it. But it's a fun finish, and it's easy for me to say now coming there that's the obvious perfect finish, but I think it shows that it took years of crafting that kind of continue to think about how to improve the event, and I think it speaks volume that, again, this year it didn't happen, but last year I think it's become standard that Prospect Park sells out. Maybe not in the Cat 5 races, so you have the Lucarelli Castaldi Cup Series, you have the Castelli Series, where those were the names of the last years. One has a 2-3 field, one has and the end of 4 or 5 field, is that right?
No, separate. It's always a separate 5 field.
It's always so it's always
Masters
5,
2, 3, and then Cat 5.
That's right. And then you have a 1, 2, 3
separate Cat 4.
Separate Cat 4.
Which I changed to 3, 4 actually.
3, that's right.
I changed to 3, 4 last year.
1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the Lucarelli Castaldi, and those.
So
are
basically everybody gets a
12
chance to race all the categories.
And Sarah reminded me I should ask you about women, and women can, and we can get to that too. But again, there's so much we could talk about here, and I want to leave some of that for another time. But they sell out. Cat 5, no, because that's a lot beginners that we would have to sell. It's probably a good thing that there's only maybe 30, 40, 50 people on the line.
And even those were selling out the last couple of years. Yeah. Wow. So the USA Cycling field limit for Cat 5 was 50.
Yeah, right.
And I was routinely getting 50 riders.
And it's 75 now.
They increased it to 75, which is probably the most you want a Cat 5 race,
yeah,
right? And we were getting close to 75, you know.
Right.
But the other races, yeah, the field limit was reached almost every race.
It's a great beginner course in a lot of ways because, like we said, it's not super hard. Though if you can't make it over the hill, then you need to train more probably. And I think in a lot of ways it's wide enough that it's fairly safe usually and all that. So they sell out now, which is I think then over 15 years from 2005 a big change, right? And we've just talked that in some ways the racing community has. 2005 was the peak of the Armstrong years. I'm assuming there was big growth in the community in some ways, yet the numbers there, at least at Prospect World, weren't low. And now, even over I think the last 3-4 years I've been here, I think I've seen the numbers go up, and like I said, they sell out.
Yeah.
I think you've done a great job, but actually one of the things I want you to talk a little bit more about is also kind of detailing what goes into hosting a race, because we talked about transparency. But real quick, maybe, what do you think has changed in terms of why do the races sell out now?
There's no other races, and let me explain that. So, you know, when I raced in the 80s and 90s, right, like, you did a park race when it was a dead weekend. And what a dead weekend was, there was no open race. So an open race is basically what we used to call an open race is that, you know, a criterium in Jersey, a road race in Massachusetts, right? When we had the park races in March and April, what was formerly known as the Spring Series, once May came, you raced somewhere else every weekend, right? Like you didn't. And even though there were park races, there was still Kissena Cycling Club. Well, let's backtrack. Kissena Cycling Club was similar to CRCA in that the Prospect Park races were for club only, club members only in Prospect Park, right? And CRCA had their own, like they still do today, club member only races, right? And that's what you did when really there was nothing else going on, right? Like you know, there was no crit, and it was rare, right? Like it was very rare that there wasn't something every single weekend from May to really October, because the racing season went much longer back.
So all over towns in New Jersey and Connecticut and New England, up New England, Long Island.
Big races, every weekend, right?
Which I think just for those who are starting now or there's maybe, you could probably count them on two hands right now. Within like 2 or 3 hours of the city. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the number has significantly decreased down.
You know, it's funny, whenever I'm driving on like the New Jersey Turnpike, going south, if I have to go like to Pennsylvania or Delaware or something, and I look at every exit sign and I laugh because I was like, every exit is a race.
It used to be
right?
right here.
Red Bank, Freehold, Scotch Plains, Point Pleasant, Seaside Heights we raced.
Yeah, I've never heard of any of these.
Yeah, all these are every weekend, and they close down the city, right? And we'd have these downtown crits every single weekend, and they were awesome. So, in answer to your question, when those races went away, what was the quote unquote training races all of a sudden were elevated, right? Because it was the only game in town, right? And so, you know, more people started coming to Prospect Park and Central Park, and it was good and bad. It was good because the size of the races increased, like you said. More people started showing up. It was bad or sad because you were slowly watching cycling disappear, right? So, you know, and the Prospect Park races and the Central Park races too have become so much more competitive. You know,
so really like not revival, but like the thriving of the New York City scene is the consequence of the dying of everything else around.
You know, and I always say that, you know, if we lose the parks, that's it. Racing in New York City dies.
No, and I think when I first came here, I was in some ways baffled by the structures. Because I've asked Lucia that question, and I could have pushed her more on that, and I can push you on that maybe too. But like I think you just answered the question. The fate of, in some ways, Kissena maybe less so because they have the velodrome also, but the fate of CRCA is certainly so closely tied to access to Central Park, and in some ways, I think also the racing scene has 3 excellent locations, but they're always threatened a little bit. I talked with Paul Castaldi about that, and we almost lost the Floyd Benefield Series, right? And I think as a race promoter, like you said, we have 50 races maybe locally you could do. Just you would never have to leave New York City. You could race here every week, every weekend, and all that over the summer. And you have so many good races. But when I first came here, also was in Arizona, and it was more like, yeah, there's a crit here, there's a crit there. There weren't really any courses that were being used more than once or twice a season, and because just the way it worked there, and we didn't have those kind of parks where you could do that every weekend. And when I came here, I found that interesting, and in some ways they still feel like training series because, well, at CRCA especially, you race the same people all the time. You race in a club races are supposed to be, in theory at least, training series, right? And then in your race is a Prospect Park, you also, it's a lot more diverse, I would say, still, but you still race more or less the same people, you know everybody. It feels like, I don't want to say they're less important, no, but I think we take them very seriously, and in some ways, and maybe sometimes too seriously. But it's not like you go to Somerville and like, yeah, that's a big race. This is like it stands out. It only happens once a year, and it has a different feel to it. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it still has that feel sometimes because of the race series, which I think in a lot of ways the race series are great because you can go to Jersey and whatnot, and you race the same people and feel safe. A lot of talking going kind of nowhere. I think but my point then is, so as a race promoter, I think you've already expressed fear a little bit there, and concern, and I think we can be concerned about what comes after you. You've been able to pass on the leadership, the organization of Floyd Bennett to Tom Maines, right?
Yep.
Which is great because, again, I think it's important that other people take over and take on these things. Where do you see this headed, and where do you see the problems of the New York City racing scene from a promoter perspective, from a race promoter perspective? Because I think you have a different perspective than, say, the bike shop person or the club, the person who's leadership of the club, or the average racer who just starts. So what do you see as an issue, as an organizer?
The major issue I see is, I feel we're one bad accident away from losing the park, right?
Yeah.
And that, that's my greatest fear, right?
Yeah.
That will something will go wrong in the park. Through probably an accident, right?
Yeah.
That's the definition of an accident. It wasn't on purpose. And the parks department will say that's it. Like, we need to shut this down.
Yeah.
I personally take a lot of precautions, right? Like, and CRCA too, right? Marshals and cones and signs, right? But like I said, that's the definition of an accident, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't done on purpose, and something happened. That's my biggest fear, right? We're blessed to have these parks, right? That we can race in one of the most famous parks in the world, Central Park, right? And Prospect Park, while not as famous, it's a public park, and that's what I try to emphasize to the riders, that we're guests here, right? This isn't our own private racetrack, right? And the obvious, don't go into like the rec lane, but think about throwing paper around and wrappers and gels and stuff like that. Or I've had cops come up to me and said, we were parked on the side of the road, which a cop can do, right? Right. And your riders just started saying "F you" and screaming, and I was like, what are you thinking? Mm-hmm. They're like, get out of the park. I was like, no. We should be getting out of the park.
Mm-hmm.
We're
guests here.
We're guests here. If that cop, for whatever reason, needs to park in the right lane, and you temporarily have to go around him for a lap, you just do it. You don't scream at the cop. Park users, people yell. I mean, we've had people that racers have yelled at pedestrians. We've had complaints about that.
And I think that happens in the race. Even though it can happen in the race, I don't think it should be excused. And I think if it happens to you, and if you're one person did it, I think then you just got to work on that. I think I think, and as I think we as the riders, because you can say it as often as you want, I think people are still going to do it. I think we as the riders need to self-police. They're better too, and I think CRCA, as you said, has the same issues, has run into similar issues, and that's an issue for sure. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to cut off soon.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Then we're gonna have to continue at another point, because I think we've only scratched the surface of the race promoting. So that's maybe let's not end with a fear. Let's talk about one more positive thing.
Sure.
What's another positive thing you've seen over the years happening? The community's come together more closely. Race numbers are up for you. I think race numbers at Floyd are at least stable too, probably. When you hand it over. What's in the future then? Do we need to create a dedicated racetrack? Do we need to find some sort of landfill or piece of land that, however hard that may be around here, hasn't been claimed or nobody wants, and as a community come together and build a racetrack, a dedicated one that isn't a velodrome, and that is I think Trexler Town, they have a little park where they have a dedicated kind of, it's a bit odd, you couldn't race 100 people on there, but it's dedicated for that. How do you see, what can we do other than hope that there's not going to be an accident in the parks?
First, we have to do everything in our power to save what we have, right? Before we start looking at other options, right? Where
and that means more than just keeping things going the way they are, probably.
And if it means, in the future, reduced field sizes or if even possibly starting earlier, I don't know how that would be. But whatever it takes, we need to work with the Parks Department. We need to save what we have. Because finding new venues, and I've been looking for the last 15 years, is not easy. I held 2 races on Governor's Island.
I heard about those. Just talk about
I won't go into the logistics about why we lost them. Basically, it was money. Right? They wanted to have a very expensive permit fee. But other than Governor's Island, I haven't found anything. I found a place in Brooklyn that I thought was nice to have races. It was near Coney Island, but they said no, and it was I wasn't even excited about it. I just thought, well, this would be a good plan B if we ever lose a park. It wasn't such a great course, right? We've raced in, there's a park in Long Island I used to organize races on for 7 or 8 years in Wanto, Long Island.
We're just a bit out there already.
They changed the parking area and we lost that. So I guess what I'm saying is that first thing we need to do is save what we have, whatever it takes. Like the effort and the fight that we put to save Floyd Bennett Field.
And I think we as racers need to not take that for granted and really appreciate what we have. More so, and that's going to take a lot of policing and self-policing on our part, right? Of the riders coming together and calling out people if they go into the rec lane. Just realizing that for 50 years we've been racing in this park, no longer, 60 years we've been racing in these parks, right? And we're lucky because, as you know, in Arizona, you're driving hours and hours every weekend to get to a race. Do you want to drive 2 hours to Tucson for a 45-minute crit or not? And a lot of times it's like, no,
Exactly.
Because it's going to be the whole day that you're spending doing that.
So, that's the first thing we need to do. We should definitely always keep an eye out, for other venues, whatever that might be, right? And I know some other organizers have found some parks, and that looks cool. So, hats off to them.
But even that, I think I've talked to them, and I want to bring those people on the show too. And I know they're struggling to find those venues. Like you just said, you're making things work that aren't ideal all the time, and even then they're hard to get in terms of permitting, right? Getting the okay from all the relevant authorities and all that.
I mean, the thing is that cycling, we have to take over public roads, right?
Which the parks are.
So when you're in a baseball game, you're in a field, or a soccer game, you're in a field, a dedicated location. So should we have an indoor velodrome? Of course. Will it happen? Not in my lifetime or yours, right? It's just not going to happen.
You need somebody with a lot of money to be very.
And we had that. We came close. Somebody was willing to give $50 million to build a velodrome, and it still fell through. That just shows you literally can't even buy a velodrome in New York City. So. I'd personally, if we had a location, what I'd rather see is like a dedicated crit course that you could run in both directions. You could alternate weeks, something like that would be probably a lot less expensive. You could do, if you could find like a 1K field that you could somehow convert into a crit course.
Right. Put down some tarmac or whatever.
That's it. That's all you need, right? But even trying to find that, right? If there's a piece of land that hasn't been developed in New York, somebody has their eye
or somebody
on
has
it.
already bought. And
wants
is going
to do something with it.
Yeah. You have to look outside, probably. We got stuff to do. You got stuff to do right now, but we as a community have things to do. Thank you, Charlie. We'll talk more.
Thank you.